They thought they were untouchable. Men who once wore the uniform of Burkina Faso, who saluted the flag, who dined in the same rooms where national decisions were made, now hidden behind burner phones and encrypted whispers, convinced that they had studied their enemy well enough to break him from within. But what they didn't know was that their enemy had been studying them too. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, the man they once called comrade, the man whose leadership had unsettled every colonial structure across West Africa, had already begun preparing for a betrayal not from the outside, but from within the heart of his own armed forces. For weeks, intelligence intercepted fragments, calls between Abidjan and the Northern Corridor, strange transfers of money routed through middlemen in Lomé, religious leaders approached with concerns that disguised subtle bribes. But it wasn't until a low-ranking soldier walked into a dusty VDP outpost with a trembling voice and a USB stick that the full scope of the betrayal came into focus. Inside the encrypted drive were maps of the presidential convoy's routes, diagrams of the communication towers in Ouagadougou, and most chillingly, a manifest of weapons scheduled to be smuggled in under the guise of humanitarian aid. The traitors had been planning a synchronized strike, April 16th, 2025. The date had been chosen to coincide with an agricultural festival when most rural troops would be off duty. The plan: paralyze the capital, hijack military communications, overwhelm the presidential guard with internal defectors, and declare a transitional military council within 6 hours. 6 names emerged from the shadows. Lieutenant Barry Abdraman, once a rising officer, now the central puppet master coordinating the operation from Abidjan. Kayoha Raine, a former officer expelled under corruption allegations, now radicalized and seeking revenge. Zerbo Lyoko, a non-commissioned officer with deep ties to rogue foreign contractors. Commander Wedrao Frederick, still serving, stationed at the Integrated Operations Center, his betrayal the most dangerous of all. Then came Kabore Constantine, an officer undergoing training in Europe, who had quietly disappeared from his post and resurfaced in Côte d'Ivoire. And finally, Captain Wedrao René David, charming, persuasive, and dangerously effective in his attempts to sway traditional leaders and religious elders into silence or support. They believed they had covered every angle. They believed that Traoré's youth meant naivety, that his rise from the front lines of the battlefield to the presidency had left him blind to the elegance of internal power plays. They were wrong. On April 15th, the night before the planned coup, Ibrahim Traoré did not run. He did not retreat to a bunker. Instead, he walked, calmly, into the national TV studio, flanked by loyal VDPs and intelligence chiefs, and addressed the nation in a broadcast that would become one of the most re-watched speeches in West African history. "Some of you wear our uniform, but do not carry our spirit," he said. "You thought you were hunters, but you were only prey circling a lion in the dark." Then, in a move that stunned even his closest allies, he read the full names of the 6 conspirators. No censorship, no fear, photos flashed on screen, their ranks, their betrayals, their ties to foreign financiers, and with each revelation the streets roared, not in panic, but in fury. That same night, raids swept through Ouagadougou. Safe houses were stormed, bank accounts frozen, signal jammers deployed. 2 of the plotters were caught trying to flee the capital in a UN-marked vehicle. One was found hiding in a church basement, disguised as a visiting preacher. Another, already in Abidjan, realized too late that his location had been leaked to Interpol by a Burkinabe agent he'd trusted for over a decade. But this wasn't just about arrests. It was about message. Traoré didn't want silence. He wanted the world to hear the sound of justice. In a rare press conference held outdoors at the presidential palace, with flags snapping under the sun and veterans standing behind him, he declared, "Let them run. Let them beg. Let them hide. But let them know Burkina Faso forgets nothing." The 6 men who thought they were untouchable now find their faces plastered across airports, checkpoints, and even grain sacks in rural markets. Children learn their names not as heroes, but as warnings. The coup didn't fail quietly. It collapsed like a cathedral struck by thunder. The international community was stunned by the speed, the precision, the unapologetic exposure. And Traoré? He walked through the aftermath with the same steel calm that first won the people's faith. He made no speeches of triumph, no parades. He only said one sentence when asked what he thought of the six. They weren't enemies of the state, they were enemies of the future. Today, Burkina Faso stands a little taller. Not because the traitors were punished, but because the people saw something they rarely witness, a leader who doesn't just defend power, but protects purpose. The six coup plotters never saw it coming. They thought they were the hunters, but in truth, they were already being hunted. They fled, but justice traveled faster. Within 48 hours of the coup's collapse, Captain Ibrahim Traoré personally signed an executive mandate authorizing international pursuit of the escaped conspirators. It wasn't just a legal action. It was a declaration to the world that Burkina Faso would no longer play by the soft rules of diplomacy when its very soul had been targeted. Interpol was notified. Profiles were uploaded. Photos, unedited, unsanitized, spread across regional databases. Airports in West Africa lit up with alerts. From Cotonou to Niamey, from Abidjan to Dakar, quiet but firm coordination began. But what shook the region more than any arrest warrant was the statement Traoré issued the morning after the warrant was sent. He did not address the six traitors directly, he addressed their enablers. You think you can harbor our cowards under the veil of asylum? You think Burkina Faso will bow to your embassies, your warnings, your diplomatic cables? We will not. If you shield the snake, do not be surprised when it bites inside your own garden. The world took notice. Côte d'Ivoire, where Barry Abdrahman was believed to be hiding, received a sudden diplomatic visit from a joint Sahelian intelligence delegation, something never done before. They came without threats, just files, audio recordings, bank transactions, testimonies, in black folders labeled with 6 names. For the first time in years, Abidjan's officials found themselves staring at the uncomfortable truth that the rebellion they tolerated might soon be on their own doorstep. Meanwhile, in Burkina Faso, something extraordinary happened. The people did not return to fear. They rose in vigilance. Youth volunteers began organizing street patrols, not to arrest, but to inform. Farmers set up coded signals in their fields to detect unusual movement. Taxi drivers were given training on spotting facial changes, disguise techniques. Radio stations played the 6 names like clockwork. Know them, remember them, report them. Mothers told bedtime stories about the betrayal of April 16th and how the Lion of Faso did not sleep through the storm. But there was more, something deeper, a symbolic shift. In classrooms, chalkboards began showing a 7th name, Traoré's. Not as a military figure, but as a chapter heading in civic education. The man who exposed 6 and chose the nation. His face appeared on murals not painted by order but by students. His quotes were printed on T-shirts, on grain sacks, in the corners of prayer halls. His story became a movement, and abroad, he became more than a president. He became a signal that the era of military puppets was ending. That West Africa could no longer be reduced to a chessboard for foreign hands. Other leaders, even those uncomfortable with his audacity, began revising their own security teams. Do we have a Barry Abdrahman among us? They whispered. Would we survive a Traoré? And while these whispers echoed across embassies and capitals, the 6 plotters remained in hiding. Hearing their names not from bounty notices, but from news reports, angry protesters, even family members who refused to shelter them. One was spotted at a hospital in Lome, posing as a technician. Another tried to reach Europe through a forged passport and was detained in Morocco. A third allegedly shaved his head and moved from town to town on foot, no longer trusting phones or friends. But the manhunt was never about vengeance. Traoré had said it clearly in his private circle. We don't need them dead, we need them seen. Because exposure is more powerful than execution. Because when you show the people the face of betrayal, you give them the power to guard against it forever. And so, the 6 hunters became the hunted. Not by drones, not by assassins, but by the collective conscience of a nation awakened. They never saw it coming. But now, they see it everywhere. By the end of the 2nd week, all 6 names had become symbols, not of strength, but of disgrace. But what stunned the world more than the hunt was the silence of the hunted. None of them made a statement. No manifesto, no justification, no public denial. Because how could they speak when the streets of the very nation they tried to hijack now echoed their names as warnings, not wounds? Their photographs were no longer simply evidence. They became exhibits in schools, reminders in barracks, cautionary tales in sermons. But while the nation buried the betrayal, something far more powerful began to rise. Traoré had not only survived a coup, he had dissected it in real time, exposed it with surgical clarity, and allowed the people, not generals, not courts, to be the final arbiters of judgment. And in doing so, he changed the very grammar of leadership in Africa. Journalists stopped calling him a transitional head of state. Academics began comparing him not just to Thomas Sankara, but to the great liberation architects of the continent, Lumumba, Nkrumah, Amilcar Cabral. But Traoré, ever silent, ever grounded, refused the myth. "Do not carve statues," he said in a closed military briefing. "Carve systems. Statues can be broken. Systems endure. Yet no leader can control what a nation feels. And what Burkina Faso felt, after the dust of the coup had settled, was something deeper than admiration. They felt possession. He wasn't just their president, he was their proof. Proof that a man could lead without selling, fight without looting, govern without kneeling. And so, villages that once refused to engage in national politics now painted his name on wells. Elder chiefs who had once criticized his youth now kept his photo in ceremonial huts. And soldiers, even those once skeptical of his path, now marched not just for orders but for him. The world watched this transformation with a mix of awe and anxiety. Some praised his authenticity. Others feared the precedent, because if one African leader could survive an inside coup, expose foreign influence, elevate youth, restore food sovereignty, and still speak humbly, what stopped others from following? Editorials across Europe and Washington began to shift tone, from patronizing to cautious. He was no longer the young officer in fatigues. He had become the lion who roared before the trap closed. And that roar, though delivered without gunfire, had deafened an entire geopolitical pattern. He never held parades, never built palaces. But on the third Sunday after the failed coup, something happened that history may one day call a silent coronation. As he walked through a street market unannounced, no convoy, no security perimeter, only 2 volunteers beside him, a young boy ran up to him with a basket of mangoes. He didn't ask for money. He didn't ask for a photo. He simply said, "Take one, sir. My father said you don't buy food. You protect it." Traoré smiled, took one, and kept walking. But the silence that followed in the market was not one of fear. It was one of reverence. Because at that moment, without a word, every man and woman in that crowd understood what they were seeing. Not a politician, not a warrior, but a moment in flesh, a chapter in motion. A reminder that sometimes, in a world built on betrayal, the most dangerous thing is a leader who cannot be bought. The 6 coup plotters never saw it coming, but history did, and it is still writing his name.